All right, welcome to Pod to Win the Game. I am Charles Robinson. We are here with the OG crew. It's been a while, I feel like, since the three of us have been together. Jori Epstein, Charles McDonald. We are all back into the grind. I love seeing you. Just a little program note for everybody. I'm in Los Angeles for the Cowboys and Rams camps. Jori was just at Browns camp. She's heading to Bengals later today. And C-Mac is on his way to Ravens camp tomorrow. So we're going to talk about that. But first, we got a couple news items we should get to. But even before that, I want to talk to you really quick about a little travel note here. So acceptable, unacceptable. You're sitting on a plane, okay? It's hot. Most of us, we're going to end up on a hot tarmac at some point. You're waiting to lift off. And the individual next to you, let's say you've been sitting in like 100-degree heat. All the shades are down on the plane because it's starting to feel like a heated tube. And the individual next to you in the middle seat slides their shoes off. And then you see them inch down with an index finger, reach for their socks, and slide their socks off next to you in the plane before it's even taken off. Is that okay? Because it didn't feel okay when it happened on my flight from Houston to Los Angeles.
I like how we set this up as a hypothetical where it's like, if this were to happen, complete random, very specific scenario.
I took pictures, just so you know. I just didn't want to send them. I want to drop it on you on the pod.
Did their feet stink?
It's C-Mac. It's like 105 every day in Houston. Okay, wherever that individual came from, they sweated into their socks and shoes for who knows how long that walk was. And then we sat in that plane. They didn't even need to get to their bare feet for it to start stinking. It was stinking when the socks were exposed, and then it got worse when their socks came off. It felt like that's assault, right? I mean, that's like air assault.
Did you say anything? Or, you know what you should have done? You should have taken your shoes and socks off.
No.
Fight fire with fire.
Come on. It needs to be. I want to know where the air marshal was on that one. There's no way this should be allowed. There should be a voucher involved. I mean, United is falling short. Got to tell you.
The only people with a gun on the plane need to show up immediately
seriously
for the feet problem.
All right, I think we can all agree that that's total bull, and hopefully that never happens again. Next time I'm saying something, I can tell you that.
Okay, but if any of our listeners have done this, please let us know. Tweet at us.
Yeah. Let us know if you actually think that's okay.
Out yourself.
We need some people to block. All right. News nuggets. First and foremost, got to get to Justin Herbert. We knew this was coming. We knew quarterback deals were going to be rolling in. It was just a matter of who was going to be the next after Lamar Jackson. Justin Herbert to the top of the pack. 5 years, $262 million, the new highest paid player in the NFL via APY. He will eventually be toppled, no doubt in my mind. He edges out Jalen Hurts' $255 million deal, edges out Lamar Jackson's $260 million deal. This is, now it's a tack-on, of course. So all these deals are tack-ons. Remember, they're not tear-up and replaces. So you still have some element of cost savings in that rookie deal. But the Chargers, this is a massive deal. You can see, where the ripple effects are eventually going to come from. Austin Eckler wants to know why he's not getting, a raise, why he's not valued more. This is why, because it's a quarterback league. One of the things Stephen Jones said yesterday in Cowboys camp was interesting. I thought he reiterated what an agent told me when I was working on the Josh Jacobs Saquon Barkley story, which was it's quarterback league. Got to pay the quarterbacks. It's about maximizing those players. This is why running backs are having problems. Justin Herbert, I think, just the latest example of why or where money is sliding in the league.
I know we're at a point where you shouldn't be like, oh my God, these numbers. But I saw a tweet yesterday that was like, I think in 2013, Aaron Rodgers was the highest paid quarterback, making like $22 million a year. Yeah. And holy dude, like we have so far gone past that. And now, I guess we're looking forward to Joe Burrow next. But I'm kind of interested to see what the Chiefs end up doing with this Patrick Mahomes deal, because now he's going to end up being like the 8th or 9th highest paid quarterback in the league. And that's obviously But you can't let that fly if you're Patrick Mahomes. So I really just want to see like how astronomical these numbers can get. And also I'm interested to see if like we ever get to a point where maybe it becomes too heavy on the cap, but I don't think we're there yet. And, you know, it's just interesting to see like where these numbers are going to go. And I feel like just what we know about the Bengals, they got to be a little upset. Maybe they haven't gotten this deal done yet, because that number is only going to rise and rise and rise and rise as some of these deals start piling in.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's sort of like obviously the amount of money that these deals are worth, and then the structure. Like in Dallas, it's always is it a 4-year deal or a 5-year deal? And how can the team have a little more flexibility with the cap? And when I look at Justin's deal and it's a 5-year extension, you still got 2 other years on the contract. And then I hear Mike Brown, the Bengals owner, talking about, we're really appreciative that Joe wants to make sure that his salary works to keep the whole core together and keep as many people as we can. I'm wondering, like, at some point, I don't know, is it going to be the salary that is lower if he actually takes a team-friendly deal in any sense of the word? Or is it just going to be that, kind of like this Herbert deal, you have so much flexibility? It's not full on 10 years Patrick Mahomes, but there is this sense of like you can manipulate the cap based on the years and how you want to do it. So that's what I'm wondering, because I just can't picture Joe Burrow, even if he wants to keep the core together, taking like a super under market deal. Prove me wrong. It'd be really interesting to see, and it'd be interesting, like, did he talk to Tom Brady about that? But even Tom did that later in his career. But I do think that there will come a time to do that. The other thing I was wondering, and this is just speculation, I haven't talked to anyone about this, is like, could you get to the point if you're the Bengals where you say, like, the value, like the max value might not be as high, but the guarantees are really high. But then also you need the cash to do that. And the Bengals aren't known for having the most cash in the league. And so I don't know if that's something that's trickier for them. But I'm curious how you guys think they'll straddle that divide.
Well, there's not going to be a trade-off until there's a pushback, right? I mean, that's the thing, is right now we haven't seen a quarterback holdout. You know, all the stuff that's going on with running backs. When was the last time we saw a quarterback actually hold out, like not show up in a camp? I'm not talking about like Aaron Rodgers and
Ryan Fitzpatrick or the Jets.
Yeah, I mean, we're going back a ways. Like we're I'm talking about a real Joe Burrow top 5-6 quarterback where the team is hedging, and the QB just okay, not going to show up in the offseason. And then, by the way, when camp kicks off, I'm not showing up. I think you start to see teams have to weigh, okay, we're having a hard time giving up this kind of money. Now we're going to have to go to the table and discuss, all right, we'll give you the money if you give us more control, or if you'll take less money, we'll shorten the number of years. You get back to free agency faster. You look at Dak, when Dak did his 4-year, $160 million deal. It was a 4-year deal. So, the upside of it was, yeah, Dak's making $40 million. You felt like, regardless of how he played, that deal was going to get outpaced pretty quickly. But the upside of it was Dak's going to get to free agency pretty fast. He's going to be back at that negotiating table pretty quickly, which is a storyline right now in Cowboys camp. He's got like a $59 million cap number, next year. And you're already talking about, when do you work on the extension with Dak again already?
Also, because the Cowboys did it so late, this wasn't 4 years tacked on to 2 years. This was just straight 4 years.
Right. It was a straight 4 years. Exactly. I mean, they'd already gotten to the tags at that point. I think that, to me, with Mahomes, with Burrow, we're going to come up with 2 classes of quarterbacks, and we'll figure out if Burrow will fall into that category. He's talked about maybe doing a team-friendly deal. He's talked about wanting to keep the band together. That has suggested he's willing to maybe do a Mahomes-type deal. I think those deals are still potentially in the offing for teams, but Mahomes, how much money is he making off the field? He can afford to himself to sit there and go, well, okay, I'm sacrificing some money in the long term, but I'm still making a ton of money, which he has said already. And yet off the field, he's going to make a ton of money, and one feeds into the other. If he continues to have the level of success that he has, they continue to win championships, he's winning on the field and off, it lessens the blow a little bit. And I think it was the same for Brady. Brady's off the field earnings were so massive, it gave him the ability to take some pay cuts. I still think over the length of, the 20 years of the Patriots, it's probably the worst 20-year run of any absolute elite athlete in terms of where their earnings will stack up long term. But to me, I think that's what's going to happen. You're going to have these guys at the top, in the top 5, 6, 7. that are all going to fall into two categories. So you're going to do something that is maybe a little team friendlier in terms of the years or the APY, or are you just going to max it out the way like Peyton Manning did, or Drew Brees, especially Drew Brees. Like Drew Brees, every time he went to the table with the Saints, maxed it out. Internally, the Saints would never say it publicly, but internally they're like, oh my God, like we're never catching a break with Drew. Like he's maxing his value every second he can. I think the question I would have for both of you is, what is going to happen? When I think about this quarterback scenario, I think about the time I was standing behind John Robinson at the owners' meetings, and someone mentioned to John where the wide receiver money was going, and he had AJ Brown. And I remember John basically flat out saying he wasn't going to pay AJ Brown the $25 million plus at the wide receiver position, and he didn't. He dealt his ass. He was like, that's it. We're not paying that money. When does a team get to the point where they're staring at a quarterback that's maybe, let's say, somewhere in the top 10 or maybe even fringe top 10 and says, no way, we're not going to do this. Like we have to deal this player now. It's just, it's not feasible for us as an organization to pay this kind of money for a player at this intersection of his career.
What will be the quarterback like where that becomes, Goff? Yeah. If you're looking at paying Goff all that money.
I think Goff is a player that low key, if he repeats last year's success, is looking at potentially being, especially if Detroit goes to the playoffs with him, is looking at potentially being like a $45 to $50 million a year quarterback. And I just cannot believe, I hear you laughing, but you would have laughed about Daniel Jones' deal too. A year ago, if I said that about Daniel Jones, you'd have laughed your ass off. But I really, truly believe this. If they replicate last year, they continue to show strides and they grow in that offense and they make the playoffs, Jared Goff is going to be a $45 to $50 million a year quarterback in terms of where his ceiling falls. I think if you're Detroit, you have to sit there and go, is this, we get it's the going rate, but at some point do you go, how far apart is Jared from Hendon Hooker? And what's our ability to go out and get another player of this magnitude through the draft and just trade Jared Goff for assets if we can at this point?
Well, yeah, I was laughing because Jared Goff, $50 million. Ain't no way. Goodbye.
Okay, but what were you going to say about Daniel Jones last year? You said the same thing. You were like, there's no way this guy's...
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would have sent Daniel Jones packing after the season he just had, but that's just me. So I think that's probably about the cutoff barrier where Jared Goff is, and it's really that scenario that makes it interesting to me that the Lions passed on a quarterback with the both the first round picks that they had, because if they wanted to, they could have could put together some kind of package to trade up towards the top to make that happen. But to me, like that,
but then they couldn't have had the pleasure of drafting a running back so high, C-Mac.
Yeah, that's right. Or the linebacker who can't really cover anybody. That's a good one too. But, I guess those moves would kind of suggest that they're okay with the idea of paying a quarterback that much. And then I guess there'll be the test case that we kind of track over, the next few years. Like, how good does the rest of your team have to be if you're like really going to overpay your quarterback talent? And we're getting there, because if you're Jared Goff and you're about to hit free agency or you're negotiating with the Lions, like, why the hell wouldn't you ask for bar minimum like what Daniel Jones got and more than that? Because at least with Goff, like, he can point back to the Rams and say, this isn't the first time that I've had a productive season like this.
Right.
So he actually does have some power at the negotiating table. And wow, like, it's just kind of hard to conceptualize, because I remember at the time when people were snobbing at like Cam Newton getting $20 million a year from the Panthers, and now we're at a point where like Jared Goff could demand 45 or 50.
Okay, so remember when agents go into these negotiations, okay, we on the outside we scoff about value. We're like, what is his value? Well, this value is just not there. But when an agent goes to the table, and I'll use Mike McCartney, right, who represented Kirk Cousins through that whole derby. Mike McCartney's question when he walked into those rooms wasn't what's Kirk's value. It was, what's Kirk's value to you? Yeah. I'm talking to you, general manager, who could be fired in 2 years. I'm talking to you, head coach, who could be fired in 2 years. You need a fucking quarterback. I have a quarterback that's a lot better than anything else you're going to get right now. And what is that value to you? Your livelihood, your staff's livelihood. You're talking a coaching staff's job on the line. You're talking front office on the line. That escalates the paycheck quite a bit at that point because the value to the Jets and the Vikings was exponentially more than Washington or anywhere else. So that's the situation with a guy like Goff. When you go in the room with the Lions, you go, what is the value to you? What is your alternative? If your alternative isn't great, then he's exponentially more valuable to you in this organization. He already knows your offense. He knows your players. The chemistry's there. You've made the playoffs. You cut this guy loose. Let's talk about when you let Eric Kramer go and then you regretted it for years. Let's go back to Bobby Lane. Like, how many quarterbacks are you going to be okay with, who are playing well, going back 50, 60, 70 years in your organization, and then you regret later letting a quarterback out the door?
I was about to say, did you see Bobby Lane play? So what the hell?
I mean, I grew up in Michigan, and at some point they had to show a quarterback highlight during my childhood.
Okay,
So
look, I just
like,
wanted to make sure you weren't much older than you're saying you were.
But Sierra, I think you make a good point because, like, one of the things that these players have working to their advantage is that most of these negotiators, or at least the people the negotiators are reporting to, have their jobs on the line. And like, there's a lot of really impatient ownership groups across the NFL. It's a league of parity and it's hard to be good. And then you have the additional question of what's your alternative? Like, who are you getting as a quarterback if you let Kirk Cousins go? And do you really want to do that during Justin Jefferson's like rookie contract year where he is an asset that's like massively worth more than what he's getting paid? And oh, by the way, we've got an offensive lineman that you can do that too. And so I think that'll be interesting. But I'm glad you brought up Daniel Jones because when we look at what Jared Goff could do if he has another great year and if the Lions have another great year, again, did Daniel Jones make a lot of money? Yes. But does he also basically have 2 years of guarantees and then like they can get rid of him fairly easily without too much hit? Yeah, they can. And so I think it's sort of like that was a team friendly contract in a lot of ways because the Giants want to build off what they did in Brian Daboll's first year. And they need a quarterback to do that, and they want to see if Daniel Jones can keep going. But if he's not that guy, they can get out of it pretty quickly.
Same with Geno Smith, same with Jimmy Garoppolo. Yeah, I mean, like some of these guys, definitely there's the element that works for the teams is they can be eliminated, early on in those deals. So that's I get that's some of the trade-off. One of the guys, there's not going to be a trade-off, obviously Joe Burrow, right? So Joe Burrow's going to talk later today. We're recording this pod early, so we can't fold in what Joe Burrow's current comments are today. I suspect seeing Joe Burrow go to the microphone, talk about these deals in the past. He's been very diplomatic. He's talked about, the core of the team. He's patted other quarterbacks on the back and said, awesome, way to go. Good job for you guys. Happy for you. I'm always happy to see other guys make money. I'm sure I'd be stunned if that's not the way Joe Burrow goes today when he's ultimately asked about Justin Herbert's deal. But do we think Joe Burrow having absolutely a better resume than Justin Herbert at this point? Joe Burrow, who's, I think you could argue, has been the one quarterback in the league currently, particularly young quarterback, who's gone toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes and said, yeah, I'm not afraid. And, we can get into the whole Burrow head thing, which I think is kind of ridiculous. But at the very least, he is okay being the foil to Patrick Mahomes and saying, okay, if this is going to be a 2-quarterback race for the next 10 years, I'm game, let's go. He's worth being top of the heap. I don't think, as Jori, you said, Mike Brown has talked about the Patrick Mahomes deal and the team friendliness of it. I don't know what's going to happen here now. Like, I don't know what that deal is ultimately going to look like, given what Justin Herbert, I can't believe he'd sign a deal for less than Justin Herbert. So are we looking at the Mahomes situation where, okay, it does put him at the top of the heap, but it is tacking on like 8 years? It is like locks him up for the next decade. And that's ultimately how Burrow balances out because he knows, like Mahomes, he's going to have a lot of opportunity off the field.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what Joe Burrow says today. So yeah, I'm in Cincinnati. We're recording this Wednesday morning, and Joe Burrow is scheduled to talk after practice today, so probably before you guys listen to this. And I know that Joe said in May, whenever you have guys on the team that need to be paid, that's always on your mind. You want that to be a focal point. We're working to make that happen. And he kind of talked about like wanting to stay together. You don't have good players around you, you're not going to be a very good team. But I kind of thought that was the type of thing that, like, not that I didn't believe him, I did, but I thought that he would say that then, and then we would not have people in the organization continue to talk about it. So I was very surprised as I was driving from the Browns camp in West Virginia to Cincinnati and listening to all the Bengals press conferences from this week. And you have Mike Brown, their team owner, starting off with, we're very appreciative that Joe understands that. And I also wonder, I mean, if you're Joe and you really are going to take any sort of discount, whether that's on structure, whether that's getting a really long deal that's not going to get you back to the negotiating table as quickly, do you say, like, hey, you need to show me now what you're doing with the T. Higgins or Jamar Chase, whatever it is, like, you need to confirm to me that you're getting these guys in the building, because you also don't want to be the player who signs for less and then they still don't figure out how to keep your guys. And also, are the players talking? And it's complicated to me because you have team ownership, you got Duke Tobin in that front office negotiating, you've got each of these players have agents. And I mean, look, if you have a player who really, really wants some sort of deal, the agent's not going to like fight them over it, but they still have their reputation on the line for their future clients. And so there's so many different parties here, and they don't all have the same exact goals. And it will be fascinating to see how they go about working this out. But I do think now that Herbert's got his contract, we kind of have things settled around the league, it seems like there are no more question marks that the Bengals are working with. And as Mike Brown said, you need to get that quarterback contract done before you can get any of the others done, because that's just the biggest part of the pie that they like to say. And so until you understand what you're doing, not just for this year, but over the course of several years and how you're going to be allocating the cap and separating it, you really can't start extending those other guys. So it'll be interesting. I would be surprised, though, if they didn't get this deal done before the season. I mean, yes, if he goes and wins a Super Bowl this year and this team is really, really good and he's really, really good, he might be worth even more. But you guys think that this deal is going to get done before week 1, right?
I do. I will say this real quick, just chiming in on the got to get the quarterback deal done. People should take that serious, because Green Bay thought, when we get the Rodgers deal in the books, then we can go and get the Davante Adams deal done. And what happened was they got the Rodgers deal in the books, and Davante Adams called Aaron Rodgers and said, "Hey man, I'm out. I'm not staying."
Right.
And so it didn't. And Aaron Rodgers was like, "What the hell just happened? Like, I thought we were keeping this together. I did my deal. Now you can do yours. Like, we're good." And no, it didn't work out anyway. So the presumption that Burrow does his deal, and then you look at, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and go, well, they'll definitely be back in the fold. I would think so, but it's not like Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers weren't close, right? It's not like, they were by far, that was, at that point, definitely one of his closest friendships on the team. And at the end of the day, Davante Adams made the decision for himself and what he needed to do. Chase could still do that. Higgins could still do that. Just because Burrow signs his deal and however he signs it doesn't necessarily mean that when another player who's sitting there thinking about their future and locking it in, getting the bag for however long they can, doesn't mean they won't do their deal. I think the Burrow deal gets done. I think they figure out a happy medium somewhere. I think, you'll have an agent saying whatever the deal is, ultimately an agent saying this was something that was friendly for everybody involved, and Joe's a team guy, and they move forward. But, maybe it takes a little bit longer than what we think. So, C-Mac, what do you think?
First of all, I think it's funny that, like, we're in a spot where people will make jokes that, oh, maybe the Bengals bungle this because their ownership is so cheap. But, like, they don't really have a choice but, like, to really try and get this done, right? I mean, you have something that's special. Like, you have something that 31 other teams, maybe 30, except the teams already have a connection like this. But you have what every team would kill to have. You have an elite young quarterback who has an elite young wide receiver to throw to, and those two guys are obviously the top priorities. So I'm interested to see how these deals look out or turn out. But to me, it would just be so hard if you're Cincinnati to look at what you have here with Burrow and Chase specifically and say, all right, well, we're going to let Chase walk over this, because you look across the division, the Ravens are loaded up, the Browns are still going for it, the Steelers are always going to be a thorn in your side. To me, that would just be too far of a step back, like, to even consider letting one of those two guys walk. Like, if T ends up a casualty of this, I think you can live with that, but the other two guys gotta stick around.
I could see TB in the casualty, to be honest with you. I really do. Because I think that, other organizations already look at him as a number one. Other organizations, I think, would pay him 20 plus. If the trajectory that he's been on up until this point, if that continues through 2023, I think other NFL teams would be willing to pay him that, 20 million plus as a wide receiver one. At which point, I think the Bengals then could potentially entertain trades. They could say, okay, well, if you're willing to pay him like that, what assets could we get out of this? And it's not just about the Bengals being cheap, but they're going to weigh it against, could we actually get something of value out of him? And I think you could. Unlike, you can't trade running backs for first round picks. You could trade wide receivers for first round picks, especially wide receivers with the size and skill set that, T. Higgins brings to the table. There's a lot there to like. And so I could ultimately see, I doubt it would be Chase Edmonds. And he's young, right? He's young. Yeah. This to me is a very similar situation to an AJ Brown, where you have an organization that's going, we're already paying the quarterback. We're already paying one wide receiver, pretty close to top of the heap money, if not top of the heap money. We have to make a tough decision here. And by the way, there's a lot of wide receivers, in every single draft. I mean, next year's draft could have 4, 5 first-round wide receivers by the time the underclassmen declare. So it bears watching. It'll be interesting. I'm very curious, Jori, to hear what your thoughts are when you come out of there.
Absolutely.
We should talk about Saquon. So Saquon Barkley, after all this...
If you guys are watching on YouTube, C-Max got some facial expressions right now.
Well, you're not the only one. Like, I'm in Cowboys camp and I'm checking in, and, I won't mention who it was, but somebody standing in front of me and they're like, what the f***? Like, what was that? What was the whole deal with Saquon? Like, what was the point of that? And I struggled to answer.
This is a reporter. I feel like I know who.
I'm not going to say.
I'm hearing it in their voice.
I'm not outing anybody at this point. But okay, Saquon Saquon Barkley ends his holdout, right? $10.1 million. He has the 1-year deal. Now, right now, the bump that he gets, it's the franchise tag and another $900,000 in potential incentives. Now, let me read off the incentives. 11 touchdowns, 65 receptions, 1,350 rushing yards, plus a Giants playoff berth. Now, those incentives, if taken as a combination, so to get the full $900,000, Saquon will have to have the best year of his entire NFL career. Not only stay healthy, it's going to necessitate him staying healthy to hit those marks, but to actually reach the full volume of it, it is an adjusted franchise tag. So initially I was thinking like, wait, if he signed a 1-year deal, like, is this the tag or is this a 1-year deal? If it's a 1-year deal, that means he's still got 2 tags on the table. No, it's an adjusted tag. So there is still 1 tag on the table. If there's any criticism at all that I have, it's after he very clearly gave indications he was willing to sit out. He came back in without saying, like, you can't tag me. At the very least, you can't tag me again. I would have been more impressed if he came in and played on the tag with the provision that they could not apply a second tag. Instead, he gets what I think is honestly kind of a meager return based on having to go and chase it, which is it's going to be very difficult for him to earn these incentives, and then he can still get tagged on top of it. It's surprising that this is where it ultimately landed.
I mean, he would have to have like not only we already said the best season of his career, but to tie it to the playoff like that it just makes no sense to me. Because what if he goes out and he has a season of his lifetime, but Daniel Jones gets hurt or something, or
right.
The variance last year, the variance fell in their way where they were winning all these 1-score games. You get to the playoffs, and then you end up beating another team that is also winning these 1-score games in the Vikings, and then you play a real team, and it's over by halftime. I don't know if this team is actually maybe as good as he thinks it is, because if I were looking at just the results that they had last year, there's no way that you can agree to have this money that you're fighting for be tied to a playoff berth. Like, I don't know. I'm just gonna have to assume that maybe Saquon is starting to realize that this isn't really a problem that can be fixed during the length of his career, right? Because by the time they can even address this in a CBA negotiation, I'm assuming he'll be retired, right? Because that's 7 years from now. That will put him at, a 12, 13-year career, which, I mean, no, I don't think he's going to be getting franchise tag at that point anymore. So it sucks because really you have no recourse here, right? All you can do is just kind of make him sweat a little bit, hope that you can get a better deal. But I just don't even know if this deal is that much better than the franchise tag that you already had. And quite frankly, like, man, you have to have the season of your lifetime to not even get incentives that are worth $1 million. I don't know. It just seems like, you're talking on the game, you're vocal about how you feel about this stuff, and then you really folded at the first opportunity. I'm just a little baffled by how this ended out for him.
Yeah, it was interesting talking to some front office people this week about sort of the running back Zoom. And I don't think we said that super clearly on this podcast, but Austin Eckler, the Chargers running back, just came off a great season, organized a Zoom for running backs, including Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley. And then I believe Nick Chubb was also on this call. And it was sort of like, what can we do about this market depression for our position? And when I was talking to front office people and some coaching staff members sort of like off the record this week, it's like, this is a supply demand thing. This is how the market works. There's really not a lot of recourse. And unfortunately, when you think about the whole like baseball wins above replacement idea and you translate that to football, there's just not significant enough difference between most running backs for them to have a case that is going to resonate with coaching and ownership and the people who in front offices who actually make these decisions. I'm not saying that we have to be happy about that, but I do think that that's the sentiment around a lot of the league right now. What I think is interesting, though, is I did have some people tell me, that said, there are exceptions. There are game changers that are just so elite and can do so many things that you have to make an exception. And some people I talked to thought Saquon was in that category, and they were surprised that the Giants were kind of taking this hardline stance. Now, you also have like the discipline in some ways that Joe Schoen is running the front office with in New York. It worked, but did Saquon really get even a moral victory? I don't think he did. And our team's just going to kind of do that going forward? Because if you have Giants players mad in the future, and I go, we'll give you potentially 10% more if you have the best season of your life and the team does really well. Like, that's really, really team friendly. And so I think, I don't know, maybe he doesn't have to hold out, and it's not his job to like change the running back direction and the market direction, but he didn't help the case for the rest of this position group by making this decision.
If I'm Josh Jacobs and, people are saying, well, that can be the framework for no, it cannot. It cannot be, because if I'm Josh Jacobs, right, I can't tie any incentives on the Raiders making the playoffs.
Right.
Are you kidding me?
So if I'm the Raiders, I'm like, yeah, let's do it. Here. Easy. Copy of Saquon's contract, white out the name, write in Josh Jacobs. I'm in.
Yeah, we'll just go out and beat the other $250 million quarterbacks that are in our division with, Herbert and Russell Wilson and Patrick Mahomes. And it's tough, man. Like, I just don't really know what's next for them. But maybe this is just like the vindictive person in me. But you got to at least make them sweat a little bit. Like, damn, let them maybe go and get to week 1, right? And realize, like, we can't run the ball at all without Saquon. Or maybe they realize, like, you realize, like, in the actuality of playing the football games that, actually having a talent like Saquon means a lot for our football team comparative to what we have behind him. Because I don't think they have a whole lot behind Saquon. Like, damn, bro, I know he's a team guy, and that part of being a leader and one of the faces of this organization is really important to him, but could have at least made him feel your absence a little bit.
Like a James Robinson edition, scared of Saquon into like, I better get in there, man.
He also he didn't even wait a week.
No,
it wasn't. That was the remarkable thing.
And like when you think about the ramp up periods and also just the nature of training camps these days for running backs, offensive linemen, like those positions that are really high contact positions. Training camp can only do that much. So, like, you really didn't miss much on the field if you decided to wait a couple weeks, and he didn't decide to. So,
day one.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if this lingers. Jori, I think you're right. I mean, there's some downside here from the organization when it comes to, look, you force players to sing for their supper and eventually they hold it against you. So if he has another monster year, maybe that changes things in the eyes of the Giants, but the market is what it is at this point, and there's not a lot that, even if he maxes it out, what's the upside? He's still not getting a $14 million a year contract. Real quick before we move on, Pro Football Talk did report that the Giants attempted to trade him. Saquon responded to that on Twitter with 3 cap emojis, which is calling lie. Right? That's cap.
Okay, can you explain though 1 cap versus 2 caps versus 3 caps? Charles, you're hip and young.
It's all an accentuation, like when one of my friends says something to me, like in a group text or something that I know is a lie, I will like write out a bunch of cap emojis and then I'll copy and paste it over and over and over again and send it, so the more cap emojis that you're sending, it's just, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. You got to make it known that that's crap. Would Saquon know for sure if the Giants were trying to trade him or not?
Of course not. Absolutely not. No,
right.
I mean,
I don't know why he's saying something here.
I would be willing to bet a pretty good amount of money that at least in the Giants meetings with other teams about other situations, even if they didn't have Saquon specific meetings, that they at least said, hey, by the way, as we're thinking about the options for Daniel Jones, the options for Saquon Barkley, the options for Dexter Lawrence, who are you interested in at what price? And like, what are the options here? So I think that it's sort of like, and then you might have someone telling Mike Florio, like, hey, they did mention this to us. So I think it's also like, how seriously are we talking about this trade?
It's a pocket listing. Okay. Like it happens. Okay. Ryan Tannehill is a good example. Ryan Tannehill was a pocket listed quarterback on the market in the offseason. And it wasn't hey, we're shopping Tannehill. It was, would you have any interest at any point in Ryan Tannehill? It's not an offer. It's saying like, what's your interest? Now, does that mean that they were seeking trade suitors? Yeah, I mean, you can, I think if they bring it up, they're opening up a trade line. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that, shopping might be strong, but if you are opening up the line of communication to a potential trade, I would say that still qualifies as trade talks. If there's any availability, now people are going to argue anybody could be available for the right price. This is a different situation. Okay. You're not making calls right now on, Herbert or Burrow or any of these other quarterbacks that are up for a contract extension. This is different. It's a running back. There's clearly a crossroads here. When you open up that line of communication, I think it's fair for another team to consider that, hey, this is a question about a potential trade. Whatever. I think a lot of players probably get pocket listed that don't realize it. Their names get brought up in conversations. They don't think that's being shopped. They don't think that's a team being open to a trade. I don't know. I think it is kind of like, depends on the nuance of the language.
If I was the Giants and Saquon, were you trying to trade me? No, of course not. No.
Yeah. You were never.
All right.
We never offered.
So it looks like the New York Post, Ryan Dunleavy there, who's pretty plugged into the team, reported on this, and he is saying that Saquon didn't want to trade. The Giants didn't want to trade him, but that Saquon's representation, when they weren't getting what they want, said, like, at least shop him around and see what a fair price is. Apparently, according to Ryan Dunleavy, the Giants denied the request to test his market, contradicting it. And then sources told Ryan Dunleavy that the Giants turned down 2 offers called into them by teams who since have shown to be in the market for other top running backs.
Okay. So if that's true, that means his own agent was shopping him. And I mean, if we're just taking this as that being the exact letter of what happened, that means your agent's pissed off. There's an impasse here. So what they do is they start calling teams, likely without the Giants' authorization, and saying, hey, are you willing to make a move for this guy? Maybe give the Giants a call. Okay. I mean, I guess in that situation, Saquon would be in the right because he's saying, well, the Giants didn't shop me. My agent shot me. And that's what's really different ultimately about this. Fine. I don't know. Who cares? Like,
whatever makes you feel better, man.
Yeah. Let's just move on. Let's get on with the season. We'll see what ultimately happens and how we feel about this in the wake of what happens in 2023. All right, let's go to our ad break. We'll come back on the other side and we'll finish this out talking about the stops in the training camp tour and get out of here. All right, welcome back in. Obviously, the three of us, we're going to be hitting the road if we're not already out. Let's go to the Browns first. Jori, you come out of the Browns. There's optimism, feeling like they're in a better place in 2023 versus 2022. Just kind of curious what you think the best case, worst case scenario is for them. I caught a little bit here and there from Browns camp. I caught Deshaun Watson once again talking about last season. It did not seem like much has changed in terms of how he frames what happened last year off the field. Okay, I think the world's going to have to move on with Deshaun Watson and just realize this is who he is and how he's going to deal with this. You're maybe not going to be satisfied with it, but football wise, what are you seeing there that makes you feel like, hey, there's cause for optimism, or maybe there's some red flags?
Yeah, the Browns are in such an interesting place for several reasons. First of all, they clearly shelled out a lot of money, maybe a piece of their souls, for Deshaun Watson. And so you kind of have this quarterback who has really high-end potential. He has shown the ability to play really, really well in the league. And they're also not asking him to carry the team in the way that I think Houston often did. They've got a solid offensive line. They've got Amari Cooper. They traded for Elijah Moore. Nick Chubb is still running that. And more, David Njoku at tight end. I mean, like, they've got weapons, and they also have a really strong defense. Jim Schwartzen at defensive coordinator. Now you got Myles Garrett on one side, Zadarius Smith on the other. Some solid defensive tackles. So there's kind of like talent across the board. I think you guys tell me if you think you're wrong. And then I think the question is, like, can this coaching staff get the most out of the talent? And oh, by the way, they've got a really hard road to a playoff berth. I was surprised listening to Jimmy and Dee Haslam, the Browns owners, talk when they said, they were kind of asked, like, what's the expectation? Is it playoffs? Is it now or never? And Jimmy Haslam said that it's really dangerous to say now or never in the NFL. It's an ultra competitive league, which isn't necessarily what you want to hear if you're trying to, like, instill confidence. And he also said that it's not that the expectations aren't high. He just doesn't want to put any sort of public threshold on them. And I think the reason for that is the Browns could have a competitive year and not make the playoffs. And I'm not saying that should be their goal, but when you think about it, like, the road to playoff contention is not created equal across conferences and across divisions. And, like, the likelihood that I remember, like, covering the Cowboys for 7 years, it was always like, goal number one is to win the NFC East. But, like, you don't want the Browns necessarily focusing on that publicly, because you got to get past Joe Burrow. You got to get past Lamar Jackson. Mike Tomlin doesn't know how to lose. No one ever taught him how. And so it's like, there's a lot of challenges there. But I do think it'll be really interesting to see sort of, does Deshaun Watson look more like the player he looked last year, which definitely reflected the rust from a couple of years of layoff? Does he look more like he did in Houston? How long does it take him to catch up? And I don't know, but I do think that, like, this defense has the chance to be really good. And I think that Jim Schwartz, I understand why they hired him. They really talk about this attack mentality. I think that's a little bit of a risky mentality that they're going with, but they believe in it and they believe what they can do with their pass rush. So I don't know. It's interesting, but they definitely feel like they can at least sort of, like, focus on football. Because the last thing I'll say is that you think about their recent years, like, Kevin Stefanski gets in the building, has a great year, 11-5 playoffs, like, much better than the Browns had recently seen. Then they have COVID and Baker Mayfield's shoulder injury. Then you have the Deshaun Watson, Jacoby Brissett, like, who's even your quarterback year. And this year, Myles Garrett took offense to the word when I said excuses, but, like, they don't have excuses. There's not a clear reason why they should say, unless some major injury happens, like, this is why we couldn't do it. It's like Kevin Stefanski has to deliver, and it'll be interesting to see how he can do that.
I think what's interesting about the Browns too is they can say, Jimmy Haslam can say whatever he wants about expectations, but we all know, we all saw the Deshaun contract, we saw the Deshaun trade. It's got to happen now. Like, every second that he plays for the Browns need to be the best second of football, like, of his life for various reasons. So, look, it's a tough division, but I am excited just to see, one, how the division plays out, and two, like, if Deshaun Watson is who he was, like, back in 2019. I know at this point we're years away from, like, having his best season that kind of spurned him into this top 5 quarterback talk. But if he is that guy, like, you have a chance in every game, but it's got to happen today because he's getting paid a lot of money, and they're at the point where they've already tried to move some money around. You can only move so much around when it's fully guaranteed like it is. So we need some results now.
Well, they sunk money into the offense too. I mean, it's not like, wide receiver assets improved. Elijah Moore coming in. I know they have high hopes for him. They feel like he's going to be closer to the player that, the track that the Jets thought he was on early on, being a high level number 2 in the organization, maybe even someday replacing Amari Cooper if the Browns get to that point and they have to make that decision. But what I think is interesting here is I'm not even going to talk about the defense. I think it'll be improved with Jim Schwartz. I think, as you said, the front line, particularly defensive line, although they still lack, I think there's still a hole at defensive tackle there. They've added assets defensively. I think the coordinator change is really what needed to happen in that room, knowing what went on in the organization last year and how the players felt about the defensive coordinator spot. To me, offensively, Jori, what's interesting is when you talk about Watson not necessarily having to carry the team, I think when everybody pulls back, let's say it's like an 8-win team, right? But, they had a balanced offense. No one's going to look at Chubb and go, why didn't you do more? This is never going to be focused through Chubb. It's never going to be focused through running back. It's always going to be focused through Watson. If they have a balanced offense, they win 8 games. Deshaun Watson throws for 4,000 yards and 28 touchdowns, and he runs for 5 more. People are going to go, 28 touchdown passes. Why are you not? Look how much money. Why are you not? You should be putting up 40 between running and passing every single year. It's always going to be focused on Deshaun has to be the one that maximizes it out. If balance only delivers 8 wins, well, Deshaun should have been better, and that would have gotten us to 11. It's just the reality of how the contract will ultimately look. And do I think Stefanski will pay a price? I don't know. It depends. I think it just all depends on how it unfolds with injuries. And, I know fans, the next individual the fans are coming for is Stefanski. It's going to happen. I watched last year, just sort of seeing how the fan base reacted. And Stefanski will be the next one that fans will come for. And Andrew Berry will be close behind. So there's going to be some external pressure. We'll see if Haslam, can basically stick to this idea of having, some patience based on what he sees on the field. It just depends, I think, ultimately how this rolls out. If Deshaun blows up and has a huge season and they still don't make the playoffs, it's going to be weird. Then I don't know how you resolve this because it's like, okay, well, we got the quarterback where we wanted to be. Now what's the problem? Is this a GM problem and not a coach problem?
I also think it's notable that whether or not we want this to be the case, if Deshaun Watson wins, football is going to be what they talk about. If Deshaun Watson loses, the allegations of the last couple of years in the sexual misconduct is going to be what the city's talking about. And so as much as they don't want to necessarily say that aloud, like the stakes are high for the Browns' reputation, and winning helps hide a lot of things. And so that'll definitely be interesting to see.
Yeah, I mean, fan base is already caping for him. So by and large, what I see on Twitter is anytime anybody brings it up, and now the Browns fans who had no attachment to Deshaun Watson at all before him arriving there, and were not saying positive things about Deshaun Watson. He's theirs now. So now it's just, the fan base is fully backing him. We'll see if that holds, if this doesn't go the right way. Moving on, I'm at the Cowboys camp. Obviously, they had their opening press conference on Tuesday. They'll hit the practice field later today. The big news, there's 2 pieces of big news coming out of here. You had Zach Martin, one of the best offensive linemen in the game, is officially a holdout. Falling behind the curve a little bit in guard money. He's, I think, 32 now. You can see why the holdout is developed. We'll see how long this goes, because under the new system, he can be fined and the team can't forgive those fines later. Whole different ball game in terms of how the fines ultimately work. And then, the opposite ends of that, and I think it kind of showcases what's going on with the team, and I wrote about this a little bit. Trayvon Diggs signs a 5-year, $97 million contract. I think what was interesting about the day is, you listen to Jori talk, and he made this comment about, urgency, and, Jori's all over the place all the time. It always feels like he's sailing without a map. But through all of it, I basically heard him say what I thought was, we got some really good players here right now. Want to win right now because I don't want to look back later and go, geez, we had these good players. We didn't win. I heard in that moment, Jori thinking about not winning with Romo, not winning with Jason Witten, not winning with DeMarcus Ware, just a multitude of other great players that came through. He's a general manager who has an institutional memory unlike anybody else. He's got, decades of institutional memory, unlike other general managers. I think he's looking at Tyron Smith. I think he's looking at Zach Martin. I think he's looking at, hey, we just went out and got Brandon Cooks. We just went out and we got Stephon Gilmore. We have seasoned players here right now where we can make something happen in 2023 who may not. There's no guarantee that these players are going to be here in 2024 and beyond. And then I heard, Stephen Jones talk about the extensions. Who did he focus the extension talk through? Diggs, Micah Parsons, like all that. He named off basically, here's all these young players, CeeDee Lamb. He named off the core. That's where the extension money's going. That's where the future's going. So I feel like 2023, you can see the sense of urgency is there at the top, particularly when they start to look at, hey, we got some foundational players here, but those foundational players are starting to get to a point in our career where some of them are going to age out, particularly some of these guys in the offensive line with their expectations of contract and their age. And maybe Dak, he's going to hit 30 this week. And you got to start to make something happen with some of these, it's not a huge core of aging players, but they're an important piece of this team that will have to be replaced pretty soon if they don't get it done in 2023. So very interested to see them on the field. Very curious how the Zach Martin thing ultimately shakes out, because it sounded to me like Jori basically said at some point when you're slotting these contracts and you're building a cap, it fits together like a puzzle, and you have to be able to rely on the puzzle piece being the same shape it was when you ultimately put it in place initially. You can't keep changing the shape of that puzzle piece, the shape of that contract, because then it affects how your build works down the line. I think they'll figure it out with Zach ultimately because they have to. And I mean, he's just that level of a player. But, there's a reason why. It's interesting. Vegas, I think the over-under on wins for this team was 9.5, which I thought was interesting because you have a team that's double-digit wins 2 straight years. You don't just win 12 games in consecutive seasons, and all of a sudden Vegas is saying, we expect a little bit of a rollback here. It'll be interesting to see why exactly Vegas sees that in this Cowboys team.
C-Rob, when you were listening to this press conference, how much did you view that as a challenge and a warning to Mike McCarthy? Because when you think about the front office and you think about the coaching staff, if Jori, who is the GM by title, even if Will McClay is running the show, in my opinion, and Stephen Jones as well, if Jori's saying, I've given you the players, I got you Brandon Cooks, I got you Stephon Gilmore, right, we're keeping Trayvon here, you got Dan Quinn running the best defense the Cowboys has seen in a long time, and you also still have those offensive core, why aren't we winning if we have the talent to win? And the biggest role of a coach in the NFL is to elevate the talent and to maximize the talent and to understand. So do you think, especially with, as much as they don't want it to be a narrative, Dan Quinn is in the building and he's getting head coaching interviews, and you have another option, right? Yeah, you have another option like down the hallway. Do you think that Jori's saying, I've given you the players, Mike, you need to show me? And it's not really about the regular season. I don't think 10 wins versus 12 wins matters like almost at all unless there's just something like really great or really embarrassing. It's about, can you get past the divisional round of the playoffs? Because they haven't done that in 30 years.
I thought, I'll be honest with you, I thought it was less explicit this year than it was last year. You and I were there together last year. I thought Jori was very explicit about, this is a playoff team. Like he was clear, like, hey, this is, I think this is a team that should be advancing into the playoffs. He pulled the reins back a little bit on the idea of it being a Super Bowl caliber team. It's always the goal every year. He always, suggests that the Super Bowl is the ultimate goal. I think he was just far more explicit about what he expected last year. This year, he did say he felt like they had a chance to be a team that was involved in the Super Bowl. But what I think was interesting was Jori didn't necessarily have to do that because Mike McCarthy was speaking Jori's love language. Mike was like, this is the best roster we've had in my 4 years. Like, this is like Mike just straight up came out and said he feels like it's gotten better every single year. Their camp last year was the best camp they've ever had. This camp's got to be better. You want to build on that. But from a personnel standpoint, from a roster standpoint, And even from, I think, the standpoint of what Mike wanted to do with the offense in terms of being able to call plays and have control and continue to lean into how the offense shaped itself the last 2 years, he put it on himself by basically saying, hey, this is the best as it's been. And I'm excited. I'm paraphrasing here, but I'm excited about it. And I was like, man, okay, well, Jerry doesn't have to go out there and say this because Mike's kind of putting it on himself saying, hey, this is as good as it's been. It's crazy that it's already 4 years, but here we are. And, Mike sounded like he's ready to go to battle. So if it flops, it's not Jerry. You're going back to Jerry's comments. You're going back to Mike and you're going, wait, you told us this was your best team. You told us this was the best build. You're the one who said it. Now, if you fall short, what's your answer for that? It's on you. We don't have to look at Jerry anymore. Now we're looking at you, Mike, because you're the one who built expectations. I actually think it was McCarthy who built expectations a little bit more. I think it was Jerry who said, in terms of the urgency, hey, we have some guys on the roster. I don't want to look back and go, man, some more guys we didn't get it done with when we could have.
I think the Cowboys, like they're kind of in a similar spot to, not quite like as dire as the Browns, but at some point, like I feel like you gotta start actualizing some of the talent that you have, and especially this year where you're looking at the NFC where Aaron Rodgers isn't even on the conference anymore. You have one of the best quarterbacks in the NFC. You should have one of the best rosters in the NFC. So yeah, I think like there should be a heightened sense of urgency for everyone there. I do think that last year it was tough because like you just ran into a really good 49ers team that had Super Bowl aspirations of their own. So I don't really think there's a whole lot of shame in losing to that squad. But I think they, like the whole organization and Dak and Jerry, like they're feeling that it's about time to get something done. Because look, who knows how much longer Zach Martin's going to be around. I know he's still at the top of his game now, but at 32, like you're kind of looking at one of these situations where it could be going at any moment. But they're still in a good spot to make a run at this. I feel like, Mike should be feeling some pressure because he has not been like a perfect or always great in-game coach as far as game management goes. And I think that can be a situation where, you're not getting the most out of your players. But, I just think, if you're one of these teams like the Eagles, the 49ers, the Cowboys, you should be looking at the NFC and say, why can't we go get it?
Absolutely.
Why not? Why not us? So it's time.
Hey, look, Detroit almost made the playoffs last year with a terrible defense.
Yeah.
Terrible. The NFC didn't get better.
It got worse.
I mean, you could argue, yeah, right. Rodgers is gone, so it technically got worse. I mean, you can argue that maybe some of the young pieces in the NFC, that's where the quote unquote better, that's where the improvement comes from for the NFC. But no, it remains by far the most winnable conference. And you don't even have to be hitting on all cylinders. And, Jori's right. I think the awkwardness is going to grow in the organization if there are struggles and it's not defensively. Automatically, people are going to go, Dan Quinn should be the head coach of this team. Mike wanted play calling. It's not, it's not hitting the way it was before. It's the balance isn't there that he promised, or all these different things. So it's a Mike problem. Dan Quinn needs to succeed him, and that's the direction we need to move in. We'll see what happens. It's a lot of focus will be on Dak this season with the interceptions last year and the renegotiation, or the extension that's got to be coming, I think, next offseason. CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, there's so many contract extension talks with some of these younger players that have to take place. Look, I think, as you said, Dallas, San Francisco, the Eagles, there's a handful of teams in the NFC where you should be sitting there and going, it's still like, this is our opportunity. We can't screw this up. All right. So we got to get out of here. I think we put enough in today. We are going to be moving on to camps though. I'm going to be heading out to Rams. We're also going to have reports from the Bears, Colts, and Ravens next week. So I think we're all looking forward to hitting those camps. And man, by the time we come back next week, it's already going to be August.
Yeah.
We're flying. All right. Well, I appreciate C-Mac and Jori getting with me today. It was awesome getting the original trio back. We will be back again, remember, Wednesday. And you can get me on Twitter at Charles Robinson. You can get Charles McDonald at 4Verts. You can get Jori at Jori Epstein. Brett Rader made his triumphant, albeit brief, return today. Stone Rochelle was out, so Brett took the controls behind the glass. Thank you very much, Brett. Fantastic outline, as always. And you can get him at Brett Rader on Twitter. And as always, help us keep Terez Paylor's legacy alive. Check out breakingtea.com/Terez. That's a capital T and Breaking Tea for the all juice tea or hoodie. You can also support the Terez A. Paylor scholarships directly at Howard University and Mizzou. But remember, proceeds from those purchases at Breaking Tea all go toward those scholarships. It's fantasy season. Make sure to check out the Yahoo Fantasy Football Forecast with our guy, Matt Harmon, and get ready for your draft season. Please leave a 5-star review. Tell a friend. Help us grow the pod. We will see you next Wednesday. Peace.